In the delightful film Broadcast News, starring William Hurt and Holly Hunter, the quirky character, portrayed by the actor Albert Brooks, arrived at a certain epiphany in life, at least with regard to his own profession as a broadcast journalist. We are all just salesmen. And at least according to Virginia Congressman Don Beyer Jr., in his C-SPAN interview as a freshman legislator with host Steve Scully, politics is just like sales. And Don Beyer of Don Beyer Volvo should know, because when not representing his Northern Virginia congressional district, Don owes his multi-million-dollar fortune to the luxury car sales group that had been founded by his father. Always go with the sure thing, and a gambler makes his luck. And at least that Phi Beta Kappa graduate from the prestigious Williams College and Gonzaga High School, pedigree credentials just up North Capitol Street from his office on Capitol Hill, probably can boast of almost perfect SATs because he had the good sense to go where the money was. And rather than venturing out on his own, being independent, he decided to make his fortune in the family business. A sure thing, a trusted and proven method for guaranteed success that had worked well for his father before him and gave him an American dream. It's like a science. But just as in playing poker, if you don't know who the sucker is, when you walk into a car dealership or any sale, it is probably you. And probably why very few people in life, except those who have the wealth to order a custom-made car or purchase a tailor-made suit, not just buying off the rack, you know that you never leave a car dealership with that dream car that you came into the dealership to purchase, unless you happen to be the sucker, or should we say sap, who fell for the classic sales pitch, purchasing a BMW ain't out yet. And if that's you, don't worry, we really don't want to know, because we already know who you are. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, and I used to be a salesman. A tough racket, as Alec Baldwin's character said in Glengarry Glen Ross. But when it comes to listing professional liars, most people would have a list that includes car salesmen, spies, politicians, and attorneys. And today's topic is about swimming with the sharks, an uncomfortable feeling, at least for most, when you find yourself without an attorney and in court. It's you, the judge, some hotshot attorney wearing a Brooks Brothers suit and Gucci loafers, who just have out a brand new Maserati and only thinking about lunch when he is smiling at you. Only a fool represents himself in court. But maybe you were the 12th man on the deal team, last to know. Didn't quite get the memo, and you know the signs. And suddenly you find yourself finding what Samuel L. Jackson's character had described in the movie Pulp Fiction as a realization very common to alcoholics, a moment of clarity. And after all you have heard about justice is blind, a right to a day in court, and a right to be heard at a meaningful time and in a meaningful manner, in the back of your mind, you have probably heard stories about mass incarceration or a need to repeal capital punishment because of inequities and racism and other structural arguments, which sound a dissonant chord in tension with your idealistic thoughts about truth, justice, and the American way, which is probably why, seeking social justice, you support the works of organizations like the ACLU and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. But today, we're going to keep it real. We're going to get in contact with reality. We're going to talk about an issue that affects over 74% of those who are actually in those mass incarcerated prisons that we read about in the news, and that account for over 30% of those who decide to go it alone, not being able to afford an attorney, not being appointed one by a court when they decide to take their civil rights case to court for whatever reason. They felt they were discriminated against. They wanted to use the restroom that did not match their biological sex in a case which not even the ACLU and NAACP have any interest at all. And like in a dealership, where if you can't afford the car of your dreams because the salesman who had agreed to the deal you had in mind, but had gone to get it approved by Mr. Otis, named for the elevator company by master salesman Harvey McKay in his book, Swimming with the Sharks, the guy who tells you that if you want to purchase that automobile of your dreams, you're going to have to come up with a little more down payment. And we all have been there. When you are indigent, impoverished, and poor, so far down that even down looks up, when you bring your case to the court to get justice, don't worry. You can apply essentially for proceeding with your case on credit, with the promise of a good deal. No money down, no out-of-pocket expenses, and justice guaranteed for absolutely free. But at least my mama used to say that you get that for which you pay. And at least Milton Freeman had said there's no such thing as a free lunch. And P.C. Barnum said there's a sucker born every day. And I now have a case on its way to the Supreme Court on this very issue. When your credit application for justice is denied, or as Reverend King had said, when you had been given a promissory note payable at the Bank of Justice that came back returned and marked with a stamp, insufficient funds. This is not about voting rights. You only vote 2, maybe 3 times a year. This is not about anything else that is outside of your common experience. But one day, and that day may never come, you may find yourself in court, unable to find or maybe afford an attorney, and there in the court trying to get justice done for yourself. And this is one of those kitchen table issues that deals directly with you. Now, the very first reality that may find you waking up surprised in court is that by simple political math, which is why we have so much debate about who's going to be a Supreme Court justice and what they're going to look like and what race or gender they're going to have. If you live in a congressional district with a sufficient majority to elect a congressman that shares your party and ideology, the judges in that jurisdiction are probably going to share your political party and ideology. And by simple logic, we can pretty much assume that if there is a problem with issues like mass incarceration or police brutality, a need to defund the police that is only affecting residents who are in an ethnic minority, regardless of what kind of signs are flying around about hate has no home here or Black Lives Matter or whatever, the judges and the police are more likely than not people who share your party and ideological preferences, thinking just like you, which empirically has not altered your everyday reality and has nothing to do with any boogeyman majorities from another party in Congress, Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, or Donald Trump. This is a local problem for you, not a foreign problem someplace else. And even Tip O'Neill said that all politics is local. But let's just for a moment take a good look under the microscope like a scientist at the credit application process at the court for being able to take your case to court without being saddled with fees, a process made available to both prisoners and persons determined to be indigent, impoverished, or poor, and codified at 28 United States Code 1915, which also opens up an additional option. We all like options at the dealership under Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 4C3, or 4 Charlie 3, as they say in the military, stating basically that the court must so order that the complaint and summons be delivered to the defendants, the people that you're suing, by the U.S. Marshals. Gonna grab Tommy Lee Jones running around trying to get fugitives, if the plaintiff is authorized to proceed in forma pauperis. And that's a Latin phrase that simply means proceeding without payment of any fees. You can toss that around at dinner parties and soirees, just for free. Who is thinking of the standard disclosure now? Taxes, fees, and penalties may apply, void where prohibited by law. An educated consumer is our best customer, and you look like an intelligent person. So the process goes like this. You report, have a civil case and a complaint, and want to go to court without an attorney and without any out-of-pocket expenses, no money down. You are going to have to fill out an application. Nobody's just going to read your mind and say, you are poor, we're going to let you go without any problems. It's going to be an application, just like you would for any security or loan agreement, going out to purchase a car, buy a home, any of these things, listing your assets, liabilities, income, and expenses to determine if you qualify. Just like if you wanted to get a Pell Grant, you have to fill out a FAFSA in order to get money from the government. So, wanting to reduce your out-of-pocket expenses, you apply for this deal. But remember that nothing in life is free. There are opportunity costs for everything, consequences. And those fees that are always paid by clients who can afford a nice fancy attorney actually pay up to about 40% of the operating expenses for the courts. Those clerks behind the desks, those judges, all of those other people cleaning the restrooms and all that, that's coming out of your fees. Also fines that are assessed in the criminal side of the court. And provide funds to provide for the correctional system and other related court agencies. So that loan to you is recorded as an expense on their balance sheet. And just like you wanted to avoid an expense when you went to court, you should assume reasonably that the person offering this deal is also a rational person, savvy businessman, very motivated to support a sustainable business model. Where what do we want to do? We want to increase revenue and profits and reduce expenses. So you are basically a liability. So you began the process with one very powerful strike against you. Who wants a liability? And if you have an unpopular case, something that a judge probably would not want to hear, you should reasonably surmise that you are dealing with another person that has those same sensitivities and feelings and emotions that you have, and that your chances of winning at the casino may be better playing the state lottery or going to Vegas, where there are no feelings. It's just kind of luck and serendipity, or so we're told, where whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and where ships arrive bearing low laden with carton but depart port just a little bit lighter with all that money you bought to break the casino in Vegas, so the casinos can remain in business for you to return and return again and again to try to leave as a millionaire and high roller. And what happens when your credit application is denied at the court? If you are a first-time purchaser, you probably don't know and remember that scene in The Rainmaker when John Boyd's company was denying health insurance claims on the safe bet that nobody would appeal. Remember, Matt Damon, he discovers this and he tries to bring this to court because it's just an injustice. Manifest injustice. It's just unfair. Well, welcome to court. and don't come back until you get yourself a goddamn license, as that judge said. But there actually is an appeal process that is available to you under a decision handed down by the Supreme Court in 1950. Roberts v. U.S. District Court. Yes, somebody sued the court where this exact issue had arisen, and in what is called, surprisingly, a prisoner case. A man in prison trying to get a credit application to proceed without paying fees. Think about this. A man in prison who was applying to get free representation in his case, but he had been denied in his appeal. At least in that case, on the basis of determination that he was not a citizen, which that reviewing court, the Supreme Court, reversed. And that kind of makes sense, because imagine the absurdity that this would have created. You have a man in prison. What's he going to do? Pay with cigarettes? And now you're going to deny him because he's not a citizen. So basically you're saying that if you are not a citizen, as defined by the statute, then you don't get any justice. Well, I wouldn't want to go to a foreign country and find out that I have no rights at all in the court. But guess what? In order to talk to that judge's supervisor, you can't just walk on over to the U.S. Court of Appeals, the Circuit Court, after having your credit application denied in the U.S. District Court. No. If you want to take your appeal, the words we use in court, and the words are very, very important in the law, you are going to be given an opportunity to basically fill out another credit application, or application to proceed in forma pauperis, or IFP for short, to use the legal lingo, to proceed without payment of fees. But now let's think about that as a retail consumer complaint. You had a problem with the clerk at the men's or women's apparel store. Or maybe you were looking for a diamond wedding ring at Tiffany & Company, where if you have to ask, you probably can't afford it. People are looking at you funny because they know that you shouldn't even be in that store. And if you can feel this, you know who you are. At least you don't have to make an appointment to see the manager at Brooks Brothers before you can bring your complaint, or at Saks Fifth Avenue, or at Neiman & Marcus. But in federal court, to present an appeal, first you have to submit a notice of appeal to let them know that you are coming with a complaint, or assignments of error, as attorneys say in court, to alert them that you are getting ready to raise all unholy hell. You and your broke ass self coming on up into the judge's chamber to let them know that you're going to tell them what they did wrong as judges. Do you think that they are going to send out the welcome wagon to greet you? Remember that judges used to be lawyers, and they also are people. Think of yourself in that position. Some angry person getting ready to cuss you out. Do you want them to come to you in your open door policy? You probably don't. And if you want to take that appeal, however, they are going to give you that credit application. Only if you ask for it, but will tell you immediately that if you want justice in that court, you have to pay for justice. Now remember, Maya Angelou said, I often hear this, especially on social media, that it's not what people say to you, but how they make you feel. You went to court to get justice. You couldn't afford justice, got denied your credit application, and now you're going to the supervisor court to ask for justice, and they are giving you another credit application. Think about this and just let the process kind of simmer for a minute in your mind. You couldn't afford justice in the district court. Applied for credit and got denied credit. But now you have to pay the Circuit Court of Appeals to review the decision to deny your credit in the first place. If you had money to pay at the district court, logically, you wouldn't be appealing a denied credit application at the Bank of Justice. And essentially, when they give you that application to request credit again with the same facts, unless you happen to win the jackpot or declared bankruptcy, and essentially have a promissory note on that bank that was returned to you marked insufficient funds. And that's why now we're at the United States Supreme Court, like Martin Luther King was in Washington in 1963, out there giving a I Have a Dream speech saying that we have come here to demonstrate a shameful condition. So now to review what we have gone over so that you don't wake up surprised like you may have done on a few elections day. Those once, twice, maybe 3-time events that occur every year that have no direct impact on your daily lives and that you forget about until the next election, but that still yet motivates you to do your duty to vote because some remote and foreign boogeyman is trying to roll back your civil rights, a boogeyman under your bed. If one day, and that day may never come, you find yourself with a legal problem that requires the courts cannot find an attorney to take your case, and you decide to John Wayne it, make justice for yourself in court. If you were not aware before, if you want to proceed with your self-represented case, you can apply for credit application that can be denied. And if you didn't know this before, you know that you can appeal. And why the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the ACLU never told you this, I leave to you for your highly educated and enlightened mind to discern. You are an adult and make adult decisions and have responsibilities. You are on notice. If you don't know, then now you know, as Reverend Kirk Franklin says. And at least dating back to 1950, with the Supreme Court decisions in Roberts v. U.S. District Court, long before anyone was out singing We Shall Overcome with Reverend King, who wasn't sitting in a Birmingham jail until 1963, or leading the Montgomery bus boycott until 1955, 1 year after the landmark decision in Brown v. Board of Education, none of which had anything at all to do with voting rights, in case you didn't learn that in school, or recently hear that in church at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And by the way, not even the NAACP or the ACLU would make Rosa Parks the lead defendant in that case that arose during the Montgomery bus boycott, because essentially that seamstress had some history that could have been impeached in the headlines, and she didn't look good for that television appearance. Remember that attorneys will, let's not say lie, but zealously advocate to defend their clients. And you know that political advertisements are still just what? Advertisements. You don't want to purchase everything you were told to purchase on TV like a sucker because you look like an intelligent person. And if you face this problem, or may potentially face this problem, or feel compassionate about somebody who might face this problem when you are followed by security in the mall, or get pulled over by the police for having a busted taillight, or get pepper sprayed, or feel that your civil rights have been somehow violated, which, at least according to political advertising, is a very significant problem, that you, doing your duty to re-elect or elect somebody, should be doing your duty to get out the vote to end why aren't the NAACP and ACLU telling you about this part of the legal problem that you may not even see in the movies, that is causing the pipeline to prison and mass incarceration and requiring a defunding of the police and appointment of judges who look just like you, at least to present an appearance of fairness, like window dressing. A Potemkin village. Well, at least according to Don Beyer at Don Beyer Volvo, at least 95% of his customers at Don Beyer Volvo are returning customers, just like 95% of incumbents are returned to Congress and have very little evolutionary pressure during election day, feeling that their seat may be lost. Fully satisfied with their purchase. And at least Don Beyer says that he and his salesmen actually laugh about how much they spend on advertising to sucker the other 5% of their customer base and clientele. And if you're rolling in a Don Beyer Volvo, guess what? That sucker is probably you, no matter how validated you feel driving around in your luxury car. Maybe even a Volvo ain't out yet. So who wants an I voted sticker? And who is feeling a little sticker shock? Now, the only way that these problems become court cases and judicial precedent where we solve cases and controversies is for persons who experience these problems or actual and direct injury to attain standing raise the complaint, because that is just the way the adversarial system works, our courts, and that is why we have a judiciary to settle cases and controversies, even if there's going to be a floodgate opening, or at least that is what the Constitution says is your rights. And you know the importance of when you have a deal, like a social contract, it's important to get that in writing. But by simple inference, if these are essentially poor people problems, and one party is the party of the rich and the other is defending the rights of the poor people, why haven't they told the poor people? Might be a good question to be asking before you rush to the polls to do your duty on election day. At least Janet Jackson had asked, "What have you done for me lately?" And she also sang about control. And did you know that just about every time that this very issue has been raised in a case to the Supreme Court, it was not the social justice progressives who said something was wrong, but rather conservatives like Antonin Scalia, Clarence Thomas, and Sandra Day O'Connor. But they didn't have the majority of votes to win that case, and so you lost and only voiced their dissent in cases like Davy Day. And if you're still wondering about why you are still singing "We Shall Overcome Someday," just remember that if you are ever invited to a poker game and don't know who the sucker is, you have only yourself to blame. Fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, then shame on me, at least my mama, in a traditional two-parent family, used to say. One more thing. When you are in state court, you are guaranteed a right to due process under the 14th Amendment, something you learn in law school, under the Due Process Clause, and guaranteed equal protection under the Equal Protection Clause, which those legislators had believed to be two entirely distinct ideas. And due process has only to do with that guarantee that you get a day in court, but nothing more. But if you are in federal court, your rights are not addressed under the 14th Amendment, but rather under the 5th Amendment, that amendment with the right to remain silent, where there is only a due process clause, guaranteeing that you cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without this guarantee of a day in court, saying nothing as to the substantive content of that hearing or trial. And your denied credit application has absolutely nothing to do with your day in court, but may well prevent you from ever seeing the inside of a courtroom because you can't afford it. And if you have to ask, you probably can't afford it. But to the degree that you know, if you want a solid deal, you need to get that in writing. You may want to ask why so many people are attacking people like Clarence Thomas for saying that you need to get your rights to due process under the Citizenship Clause that was not a civil right for you until the 14th Amendment. And I bet nobody ever taught you that in school. But you did hopefully learn to read, and you can do that all by yourself, and a whole new world of possibilities opens up for you because you have the power. And maybe that's why Reverend King had said, all we want is for you to agree to what you said on paper. And that's all this is about. He never said anything about my right to vote. Due process is defined in a 1986 case, Secretary of Labor v. TP Mining, Inc., as the process that is due. And that's the deal that you got under the Fifth Amendment, along with a right to remain silent in federal court. That's the deal that's on the paper. But you can vote for somebody still talking about your right to vote to re-elect them, and you look like an intelligent person. My name is Major Mike Webb, and at least according to the president, I ain't really black. But by God, I am running for state delegate in Virginia's 3rd District. You can dream all you want. But John Kennedy said, wake up. God's work on earth must truly be our own. So let's make America great again. Honest.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.